The wedding bells rang with an eerie finality, each chime echoing through the cold, sterile halls of the grandiose hotel. For most brides, this moment would be the beginning of a new chapter, filled with hope and joy. But for her, it was the start of a prison sentence. Elena stood at the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. The man before her was a stranger, yet his presence felt like a looming storm, dark and unavoidable. Liam Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, stood tall and imposing, his icy gaze fixed on her as she fought to steady her breath. His gaze was cold, ruthless, like the very company he ran. "Do you, Elena Bennett, take Liam Blackwood to be your husband?" the priest asked, his voice echoing in the silence. Elena hesitated, her mind racing. She had no choice. This wasn't a marriage based on love or mutual agreement. It was a contract, one imposed on her by her father's past mistakes. Her father had wronged Liam Blackwood's family years ago, and now Elena was paying the price. "I do," she whispered, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. Liam's lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. There was nothing but contempt in his eyes. He didn't love her. He wasn't here for her. He was here to use her as a pawn in his game of vengeance. The rings were exchanged, the vows spoken, and just like that, Elena was bound to him. But not out of choice. Not because she wanted to be. She was merely a tool, a means to an end. As the ceremony concluded, the guests filed out, leaving Elena alone with the man who would be her husband. She felt a chill crawl up her spine as Liam stepped closer, his imposing figure towering over her. "You are not my wife, Elena," Liam said, his voice low, almost venomous. "You are my weapon. The price for your family's sins." Her heart sank. There was no love in his words, no hint of kindness. Only cold, calculated anger. "Do not mistake this for anything else," he continued, his grip tightening around her hand as they walked down the aisle together. "You belong to me, now, and your life will be nothing but a reminder of your family's debt." Elena's stomach twisted. She had heard the rumors, of course. How Liam Blackwood had vowed to make the Bennett family suffer for their past wrongs. But to hear it from him, to know she was the one chosen to bear the weight of his revenge, felt suffocating. She was trapped. The first night in the Blackwood mansion was suffocating. The grandeur of the estate felt less like luxury and more like a gilded cage, its towering walls closing in around Elena with every passing hour. The air was thick with tension, and her mind raced with questions she could not yet answer. The staff had been kind, overly polite, even, though it was clear they were afraid of their employer. The butler, an elderly man with glasses perched precariously on the edge of his nose, showed her to her room without saying a word, his every movement silent and efficient. Elena had always thought that wealth and power could offer freedom, but here, all it seemed to do was strip away any semblance of comfort or peace. Her room was cold and unfamiliar, the large windows offering a view of the sprawling grounds below. It was beautiful, but the beauty seemed distant, untouchable, like everything in the mansion was designed to remind her she was an outsider in her own life. Liam hadn't spoken much since the ceremony, save for a few curt orders to the staff and an occasional glance that sent chills down her spine. When they had entered the mansion, he had gone straight to his study, leaving her to her own devices. It felt like he couldn't wait to get away from her, as if her mere presence repulsed him. But Elena knew this was just the beginning. He would never treat her with kindness, not when she was nothing but a tool for his revenge. His plan, whatever it was already set in motion. And she had no say. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest as she sank onto the plush armchair by the window, her thoughts swirling. She could still hear the echoes of his words from earlier. "You belong to me, now, and your life will be nothing but a reminder of your family's debt." A sudden knock at the door broke her thoughts. She turned, her heart racing for a moment before she gathered herself. "Come in," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. The door creaked open, and a maid stepped inside, her eyes wide with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "Mrs. Blackwood, the master requests your presence in the dining room," she said, her tone respectful but laced with a nervous edge. Elena nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you." The maid bowed and left, closing the door softly behind her. Elena rose from the chair, brushing invisible dust from her dress, and walked to the door. Her stomach twisted with anticipation. She had no idea what to expect from this dinner. Liam had barely spoken to her since the wedding, and the idea of sitting across from him at the dinner table made her uneasy. But she had no choice. The dining room was grander than she could have imagined, with a long table set for two. A crystal chandelier hung above, casting a soft glow over the polished wood. The silence between them was suffocating as she took her seat at one end of the table, while Liam sat at the opposite end, his posture straight and commanding. He barely looked at her as the servants placed the plates in front of them. Elena's hands clenched under the table, trying to steady her nerves. She had been raised to hold her own, to stay calm under pressure, but Liam Blackwood was unlike anyone she had ever met. His coldness, his cruelty, it was suffocating. "Eat," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a command. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the ceremony. There was something in his gaze, something she couldn't quite place, an emotion that flickered behind the cold exterior, but it was gone before she could truly understand it. His eyes were hard, like stone, but there was a depth to them that made her wonder what lay beneath the surface. She picked up her fork, taking a bite of the food, but the taste was lost on her. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the same question. Why her? Why had he chosen her to be the target of his revenge? Liam, however, didn't seem to care for small talk. He ate silently, his eyes occasionally flicking toward her with an intensity that made her uneasy. After several long moments, he finally spoke. "You know, don't you?" Elena's heart skipped a beat, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. She didn't know what he meant, but she had a feeling it wasn't a question she could answer lightly. "Know what?" she asked carefully, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous fluttering in her chest. "That your family owes me," Liam said, his voice sharp, almost accusing. "That your father's actions have cost me more than you can ever imagine." Elena's pulse quickened. She could feel the tension rising in the air between them like an electric charge, but she refused to back down. "My father was never the one to hurt you," she said quietly, her voice unwavering despite the way his gaze seemed to burn through her. Liam's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know everything about your past, but I do know that I wasn't the one who hurt you. I wasn't the one who wronged you," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You have the wrong person." There was a flicker of something in Liam's eyes, surprise, disbelief, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an unreadable expression. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. "It doesn't matter. You're here now, and you'll stay here. Your family's debt will be repaid." Elena's chest tightened. She had hoped, just for a moment, that Liam might show a hint of empathy, but his words confirmed it. This wasn't about her. It was about his need for revenge. She could feel her resolve hardening, her heart sinking further into the cold abyss of her new reality. The days bled into one another in the Blackwood mansion, each one more suffocating than the last. Elena found herself caught in a routine of silence and distance. Liam's presence was a constant weight on her shoulders, and she learned quickly that any attempts to break through his cold exterior were met with indifference or scorn. Her days were spent in isolation, with only the occasional encounter with the staff or a brief, formal exchange with Liam. It seemed he preferred the distance, as though her presence was a mere inconvenience. The mansion, while grand, became her prison, its luxurious walls trapping her in a life she never asked for. But despite the cold silence, Elena was determined to learn more about Liam, about the past that had twisted him into the man he was. She had to know why her family was the target of his wrath. Late one evening, after the staff had left for the night, Elena found herself in the mansion's vast library. Books lined the walls in neat rows, each one holding a promise of knowledge, of secrets waiting to be uncovered. She had already searched the rooms several times, but tonight, something felt different. There was a certain weight to the air, a sense of urgency that pushed her forward. She began pulling books from the shelves, searching for anything that could shed light on the history between the Blackwoods and the Bennets. Her heart raced as she flipped through dusty pages, her fingers tracing the faded ink of old newspapers and letters. And then she found it. A letter, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the library, hidden behind an old leather-bound journal. It was a correspondence between Liam's father and her own, a letter that hinted at a deep betrayal. Her eyes scanned the words quickly, her breath catching as she read. Asterisk. Your father's actions were unforgivable, and you will pay the price. Do not think you can escape this. Your daughter will be the one to bear the burden of your sins. Asterisk. Elena's heart dropped to her stomach. The letter was a confirmation of what she had suspected. Her father's mistakes had cost her everything, but she was not the one who had wronged Liam's family. Her father, a man with a history of questionable deals, had made a mistake that had shattered both families. But her involvement in that betrayal was minimal. She was just a daughter, not a participant. She slammed the letter down onto the table, her hands shaking. The truth was clear now, yet the pieces of the puzzle were still incomplete. She needed to confront Liam. She needed to hear it from him. Why he had chosen her for his revenge when she had done nothing to deserve it. The next evening, after another quiet dinner that left her feeling empty and defeated, Elena sought out Liam. She found him in his study, hunched over a stack of documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. The dim lighting from the desk lamp cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines of frustration and anger that seemed permanently etched there. Mr. Blackwood, Elena said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of her discovery. He didn't look up, though his shoulders stiffened at the sound of her voice. What do you want, Elena? I found something, she said, stepping into the room. She placed the letter on his desk, watching as his gaze shifted from the papers to the letter. For a moment, there was silence, an uncomfortable pause that seemed to stretch on forever. Then, Liam's fingers clenched around the edge of the desk as he slowly sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. What is this? He asked, his voice cold, but Elena could hear the tension beneath it. It's a letter, she said, her heart pounding. A letter between our fathers. It explains the debt you claim my family owes you, but it also shows that I was never involved in what happened. I didn't hurt you. I didn't wrong your family. Liam's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. You think this changes anything? He asked, his voice sharp. You think this absolves you from the consequences of your family's actions? Elena's pulse quickened as she stood her ground. I didn't hurt you. I wasn't the one who wronged you. My father was. Why am I the one paying for his mistakes? Liam's gaze flickered to the letter again, and for a moment, Elena saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was brief, fleeting, but it was enough. You have no idea what it's like, he muttered, almost to himself. To lose everything because of someone else's mistakes. To have your life destroyed by the people you trusted most. Elena's breath caught. His words weren't the ones of someone seeking revenge. They were the words of a man consumed by pain and betrayal. She could see it now, the cracks in his armor. His hate was not born from her family's sins. It was born from his own. She took a step forward, her voice soft but resolute. I understand loss, Liam. I understand betrayal. But I won't pay for something I didn't do. I want to know the truth. All of it. He looked at her, his expression torn. And for the first time since their wedding, she saw a flicker of something human in him. Vulnerability, regret, maybe even fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, distant man she had come to know. You'll never understand, he said, his voice flat. You can't. And even if you did, it wouldn't matter. You're mine now. And I'll make sure your family's debt is repaid. Elena stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words settling over her. She had uncovered the truth, but the truth didn't set her free. It only made her realize how trapped she truly was. Continue with the progression or add more twists. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and silence, with each moment spent in Liam's presence only further cementing the growing rift between them. Despite her best efforts, Elena could feel the walls closing in, both within the mansion and within her heart. She was no longer just a pawn in Liam's game. She was a prisoner of his need for vengeance. And with each passing day, the weight of that truth pressed harder against her chest. Elena spent her days avoiding him as much as possible, retreating to the library or her room, the few places where she could find a semblance of peace. But even in solitude, she couldn't escape the heaviness of the situation. There was no way out. No escape from the man who held her fate in his hands. That night, she stood by the window in her room, staring out into the darkened landscape. The mansion's grounds stretched out before her, silent and still, just like her life had become. The wind gently rustled the trees, the only sound in the otherwise quiet house. Her reflection in the window was faint, but it still stared back at her, a woman trapped, a woman broken. Her thoughts wandered back to the letter she had discovered in the library, the truth that Liam had refused to acknowledge. Her father's betrayal, her family's sins. And yet, the more she tried to understand, the more she realized how little she truly knew. What had Liam's family lost? What had they suffered because of her father's actions? The pieces were there, but they didn't fit together. She wanted answers. She needed to know the full story, if only to understand why he hated her so much, why he treated her like an enemy when she had done nothing to him. Just as she was about to turn away from the window, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Elena said, her voice quiet. The door creaked open, and the maid from earlier stepped inside, her expression hesitant. "Mrs. Blackwood, the master requests your presence in his study," she said, bowing slightly before leaving. Elena's heart sank. His study again. She had hoped to avoid him for just a little longer, but it seemed fate was against her. With a resigned sigh, she smoothed her dress and left her room, her mind racing with what to expect. Liam's study was as imposing as the man himself. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the desk lamp. The faint scent of tobacco hung in the air, adding to the tension that always seemed to permeate his presence. He sat behind his massive desk, papers scattered around him, his brow furrowed as he worked in silence. He didn't acknowledge her presence at first, and for a moment, Elena wondered if he had called her here just to ignore her again. Finally, he looked up, his eyes cold and distant as always, but there was something else there. Something sharp, like he was waiting for her to speak. "I didn't ask you to come here to talk about your family's debt," he said, his voice a low growl. "I have something else for you." Elena's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a thick envelope from the desk and slid it across to her. The envelope was sealed with the Blackwood family crest, the wax glistening in the dim light. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, pulling out a series of photographs. They were old, faded with time, but the faces were unmistakable. Her father, younger, smiling beside a woman Elena didn't recognize. And beside them, a man she now knew all too well, Liam's father. Her breath caught in her throat as she flipped through the images. There were more. Photos of family gatherings, moments that seemed so normal, so peaceful. But the final photo stopped her cold. It was a photograph of her father shaking hands with Liam's father, their faces solemn. And behind them, the shadow of a third figure, a man whose face was hidden, but whose presence seemed to loom over them both. "This is from the past," Liam said, his voice hard as granite. "This is what you need to understand. Your father and mine were close, Elena. Too close." Elena's mind spun as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. "What does this mean?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "It means your father wasn't just a businessman," Liam said slowly, his gaze unwavering. "He was a part of something far darker. My father trusted him, until he didn't. Your family's involvement in the Blackwood downfall wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. And you are the price I've had to pay for that betrayal." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Elena's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Her father hadn't just been a businessman caught up in bad deals. He had been a player in something much larger, something that had ruined Liam's family. But then, a strange realization washed over her. If her father had been involved, why hadn't Liam told her this sooner? Why had he been so fixated on making her suffer? Liam's gaze hardened, as if he could read her thoughts. You think this is about the past, don't you? But it's more than that. Your father's betrayal destroyed my family, Elena. And now, I'll destroy yours. Starting with you. Elena stood there, the weight of his words settling in her chest like a stone. He had never cared about her, not once. She was a means to an end, a tool in his grand design. And now, it seemed, he was bent on breaking her. But there was something inside her that refused to be broken. I won't let you do this, she said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. I won't be your pawn anymore. Liam's lips curled into a cruel smile. You think you have a choice? Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She was done playing his game, done being the victim. She would fight back, even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant risking her heart. The days that followed the confrontation in Liam's study were a blur of cold stares, calculated silences, and subtle battles of will. Elena could feel herself slowly unraveling. Each time she walked past Liam, each time his gaze fell on her, it was as if he were trying to break her all over again. The weight of his words, the cruelty behind them, gnawed at her, but there was something else growing inside her, something stronger than fear, defiance. She couldn't just stand by and let him destroy her. She would fight back, even if it meant using the same strategies of manipulation he had mastered. She wouldn't be a pawn in his game, not anymore. That evening, she found herself in the library again, this time for a different purpose. The dim lights cast long shadows across the rows of books, and for a moment, she felt a sense of solace in the familiar surroundings. But her mind was far from at ease. Elena had decided she would take matters into her own hands. She couldn't just wait for Liam to destroy her. She needed to understand his weaknesses. He wasn't invincible, despite what he made her believe. If there was any way to break the cycle of vengeance he was so determined to perpetuate, it was through knowledge. She had already discovered the letter, but now, she needed to find something more, something that would make Liam see her as more than just a tool for revenge. Her search led her to a hidden drawer within one of the large wooden bookshelves. After carefully examining its edges, she managed to slide it open, revealing a collection of old documents and photographs. Elena's fingers trembled as she rifled through them, her heart racing with anticipation. There were more photographs of her father and Liam's father, but these were different. These weren't just about business deals. These showed a connection, a deep, almost familial bond between the two men. She found a letter at the bottom of the drawer, a personal one. It was from Liam's father to her father, and the words written on the page were chilling. Asterisk, Elena's father has been a great asset to us, but his ambition grows. I fear it will destroy us all, if we don't act soon. Asterisk. Elena's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the key to understanding everything. Her father had been more involved than she had ever known, but what did this letter mean? Why was Liam's father so worried? She closed the drawer quietly and tucked the letter into her coat, her mind spinning. It was time to confront Liam again, but this time, she wouldn't just ask him questions, she would show him that she wasn't the enemy, that she wasn't the one who had caused the damage. Later that night, Elena found Liam in his study, once more. He was leaning over his desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, his brow furrowed as he stared at the papers in front of him. For a brief moment, she almost felt sympathy for him. He looked so weary, so burdened. But then she remembered the cruelty in his eyes, the way he had treated her. She couldn't afford to pity him. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice firm. He looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he saw her approach. What is it now? He asked, his tone sharp. I found something, she replied, her heart steadying as she placed the letter on his desk. Liam's gaze flickered to the paper, but his expression didn't change. What is this? He asked, his voice betraying none of the curiosity she had expected. Elena stood tall, her confidence now unwavering. It's a letter from your father to mine. It talks about my father's ambition and how it could destroy them both. Your father knew what was happening. He feared my father just as much as you do." Liam's jaw clenched. He didn't reach for the letter immediately, but his eyes were fixed on it, the tension in his posture palpable. "You think this changes anything?" he asked, his voice low. "Dangerous." "I think it proves one thing," Elena said, her voice steady. "Your vendetta isn't with me. It's with the mistakes of the past, mistakes that neither of us can change." "I didn't do anything to you, Liam. I'm not your enemy." For the first time, Liam faltered. His eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, Elena saw a crack in his cold exterior. But it was gone before she could even register it. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You still don't understand what your family did to mine." "I understand more than you think," Elena replied, her voice unwavering. "But this," she gestured to the letter, "this is the truth. Your father knew everything, just like mine did. And now, we're both trapped in this. But I'm not going to let you destroy me for something I didn't do." Liam's expression darkened, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with intensity. "You think you can just walk away from this? That you can walk away from me?" "I'm not trying to walk away from you," Elena said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "I'm trying to walk away from the past. From the hatred. From the vengeance that you refuse to let go of." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like an invisible force. Finally, Liam broke the silence, his voice quieter now, but filled with something Elena hadn't expected: regret. "I never wanted this for you, Elena," he said, his voice softer. "I never wanted to drag you into this mess. But I don't know how to stop." Elena looked at him, the weight of his words settling in her chest. Was this an admission of weakness? A glimpse into the man beneath the cold exterior? "I don't know how to stop either," she replied softly. "But we have to, before it's too late." Liam's gaze softened for a fleeting moment, his eyes searching hers. "You're right. It's too late for us, Elena. But it might not be too late for you." How Elena plans to get out of this twisted situation. The days following their tense conversation felt like a battle between hope and despair. Elena wasn't sure what had shifted between them, but something had. Liam's harsh exterior had cracked, just slightly, but it was enough to make her question everything she thought she knew about him. She spent the following days carefully watching him, noticing the moments when he looked at her not with disdain, but with something else, something softer, more vulnerable. It was as if a small piece of the man she had been married to for weeks was being revealed. But could she trust it? Could she believe that this was anything more than another manipulation? Every moment with him felt like walking on a tightrope. She had no choice but to be cautious, but it wasn't easy. The lines between vengeance and genuine connection were blurring, and Elena wasn't sure which side she should be on anymore. One evening, after another long and exhausting day of avoiding each other, Elena found herself standing in the mansion's courtyard, staring at the darkened sky. The night air was cool against her skin, but it did little to quell the turmoil inside her. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep living like this, trapped in a marriage she hadn't chosen, with a man who couldn't seem to decide whether he wanted to hurt her or protect her. The sound of footsteps behind her startled her, and she turned to find Liam standing a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low, but with an edge of frustration. "I've been trying to avoid the situation," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "You've made it clear that you want nothing to do with me." Liam shook his head, taking a step closer. "That's not true," he said, his voice almost a whisper. I've been trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Elena repeated, disbelief evident in her tone. "By marrying me? By making me part of your revenge?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "It was never supposed to be like this. I never wanted you involved in all of this. But when my father died, when everything fell apart, I didn't know what else to do. I wanted justice. And you, your family, were the only ones I could take it from." Elena swallowed the lump in her throat, her mind racing as she processed his words. It was clear now that Liam had been acting out of pain, out of a deep-rooted need for retribution. But what did that mean for her? Could he truly let go of his vengeance? And if he could, would he ever be able to truly love her? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm not the enemy, Liam. I never was. And I can't keep living like this. His eyes darkened as if the words stung, but she saw something else there, something she hadn't expected. Guilt. He took a step closer, but this time, there was no anger in his movements. Only a quiet desperation. Then what do you want? He asked softly. What do you want from me? Elena's heart ached as she looked at him. She had spent so long trying to find a way out of this situation, trying to find a way to escape the marriage, to free herself from the weight of his expectations. But now, faced with his question, she realized she wasn't sure anymore. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to be part of his war. She just wanted peace. I want you to stop, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to stop fighting this. Stop punishing me for things I didn't do. We can't keep living in the past, Liam. We need to move forward. Together or apart. But we need to make a choice. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Liam's expression was unreadable, and for a long moment, Elena wasn't sure if he had heard her, if he understood what she was asking of him. Finally, he spoke, his voice almost too quiet to hear. I don't know if I can forgive your family, he admitted, his words raw with emotion. But I do know one thing. Elena's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding as she waited for him to continue. I never wanted you to be a part of this, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. I never wanted you to suffer because of something you didn't do. I've made a terrible mistake. And I need you to know, I'm sorry. The sincerity in his voice made Elena's chest tighten. She had never expected an apology from him. Never thought he would admit his role in all of this, let alone express any remorse. But now, faced with the reality of his words, she realized something else. Forgiveness wasn't something she could give him just yet. She still had too many questions, too much pain to process. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward, even if it meant starting from scratch. I don't know if I can forgive you, Liam, Elena said quietly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside her. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and hope. I'll do whatever it takes, Elena. I'll prove to you that I'm not the man you think I am. Elena's heart wavered at the rawness of his words, the vulnerability in his eyes. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the CEO, beneath the cold mask of vengeance, a man who was capable of more than she had ever given him credit for. But even as her heart softened, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than Liam was telling her. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. And she wasn't ready to let go of the truth, not yet. Let's take it one step at a time, Elena said, her voice calm but resolute. And we'll see where it leads. Understanding Liam, or explore more of his past and secrets. The days after their heart-to-heart were a delicate balance. Elena was cautious, observing Liam from a distance, trying to gauge if the apology was genuine or just another strategic move in his quest for vengeance. His behavior had shifted, no longer as cold or calculating as it once had been, but there was still a distance between them, an invisible wall that neither of them knew how to break down completely. Elena had made her decision. She would stay for now. But it wasn't out of love or loyalty, not yet. It was a decision made out of necessity. She couldn't leave without understanding the full truth, without knowing what lay beneath Liam's anger and his father's influence. Her nights were spent poring over the documents she had found in Liam's study, her mind racing with possibilities. The letter from Liam's father to her own father had been a breakthrough, but there was still so much left unanswered. What had her father done to deserve such hatred from Liam's family? Why had Liam been so determined to punish her for her father's sins when she had never even known about them? One evening, Elena decided it was time to confront the root of the problem. She had learned enough to know that Liam's father was the key to everything. His involvement in her family's downfall was more complex than she had realized, and she couldn't keep dancing around the truth. She found Liam in his office again, staring at the screen of his laptop, his face lit by the soft glow of the screen. The moment he saw her, he immediately closed the laptop and looked at her, his gaze guarded. "What is it?" he asked, his tone neutral. Elena hesitated for a moment, but then the decision came to her. She had to ask, had to know if there was more he wasn't telling her. "I need you to tell me everything," she said, her voice steady despite the apprehension swirling in her chest. "I need you to tell me what happened between our families." Liam's eyes flickered with something Elena couldn't quite place. Surprise, maybe, or uncertainty, but he didn't move. His jaw tightened, and for a long moment, it seemed as if he was considering whether to tell her or not. "I've already told you the important parts," he replied finally, his voice clipped. "I've told you about my father's death, about the revenge I sought." Elena shook her head. "That's not enough. There's more to it than that. I found a letter from your father to mine. It's not just about business deals. It's about something deeper, something personal." Liam's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Elena thought he might deny it, push her away again. But instead, he sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the past had suddenly become too much for him to bear. "You have no idea what you're asking, Elena," he muttered. "I don't, but I need to," she said softly. "I need to understand. I need to know what happened to make you hate me before you even met me." Liam looked at her then, his gaze piercing, and for the first time, she saw something like fear in his eyes. It was brief, barely there, but Elena didn't miss it. "I was only a child when it all started," he began, his voice quiet, as if the words themselves were heavy with years of pain. "My father and your father were close. Business partners, yes, but it was more than that. They were friends. I grew up with the idea that family loyalty meant everything, that it was the foundation of who we were." He paused, his eyes darkening as he looked out the window. "But my father made a choice that would change everything. He was betrayed by your father." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Betrayed?" she whispered. Liam nodded slowly. "Your father made a deal with another company, a rival of ours. But it wasn't just business. It was personal. My father's downfall wasn't just the result of bad deals or bad luck. It was your father's ambition. Your father took everything, our company, our legacy, and used it to climb higher. He used my father's trust to destroy him." Elena could hardly breathe. She had never known her father to be involved in anything shady, let alone something that could ruin Liam's family. "But why didn't you tell me this sooner? Why didn't you explain this when we were?" "Because I was blinded by anger," Liam cut in, his voice raw with emotion. "I hated your family for what they did to mine. I hated you because you were the product of everything I despised. And I wanted revenge. I thought that by marrying you, by forcing you into this, I could finally make you feel the pain I had carried for so long." Elena's heart twisted as the weight of his words settled into her chest. He hadn't just wanted revenge on her father, he had wanted to punish her for something she had never done. "But you didn't deserve this," he continued, his voice softer now, almost regretful. "You weren't the one who betrayed my father. You weren't the one who destroyed everything. It was never supposed to be you, Elena." She closed her eyes, the realization crashing over her. "Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't you see that I wasn't your enemy?" "I couldn't," he admitted quietly. "I was too blinded by my own rage. I wanted to make you feel the way I felt. But in doing that, I only hurt you. I see that now." Elena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. It was all too much, the anger, the pain, the betrayal. It wasn't just his family that had been destroyed. It was hers, too. And now, they were both standing in the ruins of it all. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she whispered. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you." Liam's face fell, but he didn't look away. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, at least. But I want to make things right. I want to show you that I'm not the man you think I am. That I'm not just the product of my father's revenge." Elena turned away, her chest tight with emotion. She needed space, time to think. There was so much to process, so much more than she had ever imagined. The life she had built with Liam, the man she had married, it wasn't what it seemed. And now, she didn't know what to do with it all. But one thing was clear. The road to redemption would be long. And they both had a lot of work to do before they could ever hope to move past the mistakes of the past. Our focus on Elena's next steps in this tangled mess? Elena spent the next few days in a haze. Her mind was consumed by the revelations Liam had shared with her, and the pain of realizing how deeply his family's hatred had poisoned their relationship. Every interaction with him now felt like walking through a minefield, each step fraught with the risk of setting off another explosion of emotion or regret. She had tried to keep some distance, both physically and emotionally, but it was impossible. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with all the things they couldn't say or didn't know how to say. Despite everything, despite the pain and the uncertainty, Elena felt herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't ignore. Liam wasn't the monster she had once thought him to be. He had been blinded by rage, by the need to avenge his father's death, and she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. Yet, as much as Elena wanted to blame him for everything that had gone wrong, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. He had lost so much, his family, his company, his sense of trust. She understood more than anyone how it felt to lose the things that defined who you were. One evening, as the sun began to set and the orange light filtered through the large windows of their home, Elena found herself standing in the library, a place she had come to avoid since their marriage. She had often used it to escape, to be alone with her thoughts, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like the last place she needed to be alone. She picked up a book from the shelf and flipped through the pages absently, not really reading but allowing the motion to calm her restless mind. Her thoughts kept circling back to Liam, his apology, his vulnerability, the way he had opened up to her for the first time. He wasn't the man who had forced her into this marriage out of revenge. He was a man who had been broken, and it seemed like only now was he starting to rebuild. A soft knock on the door broke her from her thoughts, and she looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway. His usual confident posture was replaced with a more uncertain stance, as though he, too, wasn't sure of what to say next. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low and hesitant. Elena nodded, setting the book down and standing up. She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. He looked like a man on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to take a step forward or retreat. She motioned for him to come in. "We should talk." Liam stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with everything that had gone unsaid in the days since their last conversation. Finally, Liam broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice steady, but with an underlying intensity. "About us. About what we're doing here. I've been so focused on my own anger, on the things I thought I had to do, that I didn't stop to think about what you needed." Elena swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. "And what do you think I need, Liam?" He took a step closer to her, his gaze searching hers as if he were trying to read her, to figure out what was in her heart. "I think you need honesty. I think you need to know that I'm not the man I was before. I'm trying to change. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I do want to make things right." Elena's heart fluttered at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was still a chance for them, but the scars of their past were deep. Could she trust him again after everything he had put her through? "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I don't know if I can forgive everything you've done to me. And I don't know if I can keep living like this, caught between what's real and what's just revenge." Liam's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed unsure of himself. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now," he said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance. A chance to show you that I can be different. A chance to prove that I'm not just my father's son. That I can be the man you deserve." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his words was unmistakable, but she was still afraid. She had been hurt too many times to let her guard down easily. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever be what you want me to be." "You don't have to be anything for me," Liam replied, his voice low but earnest. "You just have to be yourself. I'll do the rest. But I need you to meet me halfway. I need you to stop running. Stop pushing me away." Elena felt a wave of emotion wash over her, and she closed her eyes to steady herself. Could she really let herself trust him again? Could she allow herself to be vulnerable in front of him after everything that had happened? When she opened her eyes, Liam was still standing in front of her, waiting for her response. His gaze was unwavering, filled with a quiet determination that made her heart ache. She took a deep breath. "I don't know what the future holds, Liam, but I can't keep living in the past. We both have to move forward, and I'm willing to try. But you have to promise me something." "What?" he asked, his eyes narrowing in concern. "Promise me that if this is going to work, you won't hide from me. You won't keep secrets. We can't keep going in circles. I need honesty. I need the truth, no matter how painful." Liam's jaw tightened, and he gave a small nod. "I promise. No more secrets." A fragile silence fell between them, but it was different from before. It wasn't filled with suspicion or resentment. It was the beginning of something new, something uncertain, but real. "Then let's start over," Elena said quietly, "and see where we go from here." Into Liam's family dynamics and past? The days after Elena's decision to try again with Liam felt like a delicate dance. They were walking on thin ice, each step hesitant and unsure, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile understanding they were beginning to build. For Elena, every interaction with him was a test of her own willpower, of her ability to resist the temptation to fall back into old patterns, to trust him again despite the scars of their past. Liam, on the other hand, seemed determined to prove himself to her. He was more attentive, more present, but there was still an unspoken distance between them, a barrier neither knew how to cross. Yet, for the first time, there was an undercurrent of hope in the air, a quiet promise that perhaps, just perhaps, they could rebuild what had been broken. As they spent more time together, Elena began to notice the subtle changes in Liam. He no longer wore the cold, calculating mask that had been his armor for so long. Instead, there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. When he would lower his guard, just for a second, and she would catch a glimpse of the man he used to be before all the pain and revenge had consumed him. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the tension between them felt different. It wasn't the strained, heavy silence of their earlier days. It was something more comfortable, more familiar. They had found a rhythm, a way of coexisting without the constant shadow of animosity hanging over them. But as Elena looked at him, she knew that this was only the beginning. There was still so much more to unravel, the truth about their families, the betrayal that had destroyed them both, and the lingering secrets that Liam had yet to reveal. "Liam," she began quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of the wineglass in her hand, "I think it's time we talked about what really happened between our families. I know you've told me your side, but there's more to this, isn't there? Your father and mine." Liam's face darkened, and for a moment, the mask of control returned. He set his glass down with a sigh, looking away as if the past were something he could never fully escape. "I've already told you everything you need to know," he said stiffly. "My father's death, your father's betrayal. What more is there to say?" Elena's eyes softened, her voice gentle but firm. "There's more. You said yourself that your father's death wasn't just business. It was personal. I need to understand, Liam. I need to understand what your father did to mine, why it was so much more than just a bad deal." Liam clenched his jaw, his hands tightening on the armrests of his chair. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Elena could feel the tension rising between them, the weight of the past pressing down on both of them, suffocating the fragile space they had started to carve out for themselves. "I've told you that my father was betrayed," Liam finally said, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "But what I didn't tell you was why. why he trusted your father so completely, and why your father's betrayal hurt so much. Elena leaned forward, her heart racing as she sensed that this was the moment when everything would change. Why? Liam's gaze met hers, raw and pained. Because they were more than business partners. They were friends. Close friends. My father thought he knew your father, trusted him like a brother. And when your father turned on him, when he used that trust to ruin us, it destroyed everything. My father never recovered. He became obsessed with revenge. And that obsession cost him his life. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had known that her father's business dealings had been complex, but she had never imagined that it could be so personal, so destructive. But why didn't he tell me? She asked, her voice trembling with the weight of her own confusion. Why didn't he tell me what happened? Why did he keep this from me? Liam shook his head slowly. Your father was trying to protect you. He didn't want you to be involved in all of this. He didn't want you to carry the same burden that he had. But in doing that, he kept you in the dark. And now you're caught in the middle of it all. Elena stood up abruptly, her hands shaking as she walked toward the window, staring out at the city lights below. The truth was too much to process all at once. The lies, the secrets, the betrayal, it was all too much. She had spent her whole life thinking her family's history was clean, honorable, but now she was realizing that it had been anything but. I don't know what to do with all of this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know who to trust anymore. My father, your father, everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie. Liam stood up and walked over to her, his presence steady, unwavering. He reached out, gently touching her arm. I know it's a lot, but I'm here, Elena, and I'm not going anywhere. Elena turned to face him, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. But what about everything else? What about the way we got here? The way you treated me? How do I forgive that? How do I forgive you? Liam's eyes softened with regret, and for the first time, Elena saw the depth of his own pain. I don't expect you to forgive me, not yet. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for a chance, Elena. A chance to show you that I can be better. That I'm not just my father's son. That I can be the man you deserve. Elena took a deep breath, looking up at him, her chest tight with the weight of it all. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure if she could ever fully forgive him for everything he had done. But one thing was clear, she wasn't ready to give up on him just yet. Not when he had shown her this side of himself. Not when she saw the possibility of something more. Let's take this one step at a time, she said softly, her voice laced with uncertainty, but also with hope. I can't promise you anything, but I'll try. We'll try. Liam's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. That's all I can ask for. As they stood there, facing each other, Elena felt the first real glimmer of hope since their marriage began. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and pain. But for the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, there could be a future for them after all. As passed and the consequences of their actions? Weeks passed since their conversation in the library, and with each passing day, Elena and Liam slowly began to rebuild their relationship, one fragile step at a time. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of their past threatened to pull them back into the darkness, but they kept pushing forward. They learned to speak honestly with each other, to be vulnerable in ways they never had been before. Liam was more present than ever, offering her small gestures of kindness that felt like milestones. He remembered her favorite books, brought her flowers just because, and sat with her for hours in silence, letting her talk about anything and everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. However, the ghosts of their family's past still lingered, haunting them in quiet moments, in shared looks, and in the unspoken questions that hung between them. Elena had learned things she never could have imagined about her father, things that challenged everything she had believed about him. The betrayal, the lies, the pain. It all felt like a heavy burden she had to carry alone. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, Elena found herself staring at her plate, unable to meet Liam's gaze. She had been doing a lot of thinking, trying to piece together the broken parts of her life. The truth about her father was still too fresh, too raw, but she could no longer deny that she had to confront it head-on. Liam noticed her distraction, and his voice, gentle but concerned, broke through her thoughts. "Elena, what's going on? You've been distant these past few days."
Talk to me.
She looked up, meeting his eyes. His concern was genuine, and for a moment, she felt the weight of everything, the pain, the history, the lies, crashing down on her. But this time, she wasn't afraid to face it. Not anymore. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice trembling slightly but steady, "about everything. About my father's betrayal, about yours, about us. And I've realized something." Liam leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers, waiting for her to continue. "I realize that I can't change the past. Neither of us can," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But what we do with the future is still in our hands. We don't have to be defined by the sins of our families. We can choose a different path." Liam was silent for a long moment, his gaze intense as he processed her words. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right. We can't undo what happened. But we can choose to make things right. We can choose to live differently. And I choose you, Elena. I choose to fight for us. For this." Her heart swelled at his words. It wasn't a promise to erase everything that had come before. It was a commitment to move forward together, no matter how difficult the road might be. And for the first time in their marriage, Elena believed him. "I choose you, too," she whispered, the words coming more easily than she had expected. The room seemed to grow still as the weight of their shared decision settled between them. They had both suffered, both been wronged in ways they couldn't fully understand, but in that moment, they realized that they were no longer enemies. They were partners standing side by side against the world. The rest of the evening passed in a comfortable silence, as if the world outside no longer mattered. For once, Elena felt like she could breathe again. She wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. She was her own person, and with Liam, she could build something new, something real. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship continued to grow. It wasn't without its struggles, of course. There were moments of doubt, of fear, and of uncertainty. But they faced them together, always moving forward, always choosing each other. Eventually, Elena made peace with the truth about her father. She understood now that while she couldn't change the past, she had the power to shape her own future. And for the first time in her life, she was no longer afraid of what that future might hold. As for Liam, he remained by her side, never asking for forgiveness, but earning it with every gesture, every word, every promise. And as the years went by, their love deepened, not in spite of the past, but because of it. They had both been broken, but together, they learned how to heal. And in the end, Elena knew that she had found something more than just a marriage. She had found a partner, a friend, and someone who truly understood her. The road to this point had been long and fraught with pain, but it had also been filled with moments of grace and redemption. Together, they had built a future from the wreckage of their past, and that, Elena realized, was the greatest gift they could have ever given each other. As they might face together in a potential sequel,